The Kalari homeworld burned beneath alien skies as Ambassador Thelshan watched from his transport's viewport. Purple flames consumed what had once been the floating gardens of New Kalos, while strange metallic creatures swept through the crystalline cities like a plague of destruction. His people's beautiful song cities, which had harmonized with the planet's natural frequencies for millennia, now produced only discordant screams. "Ambassador, we're receiving another distress signal from the southern continent," reported Communications Officer Veltar. Her usually melodious voice cracked with exhaustion. They had been fleeing for 6 cycles now, ever since the Devourers had emerged from the void between galaxies. Thelshan closed his eyes and felt the weight of his species' survival pressing against his consciousness. The Kalari had always been a peaceful people, their entire civilization built around harmony, art, and the cultivation of beauty. Their greatest weapons were symphonies that could move mountains. Their strongest defenses were gardens that could purify entire atmospheres. Against the mechanical horror of the Devourers, they might as well have been throwing flower petals at a hurricane. "Set course for the rendezvous point," he commanded, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. "We must reach the Galactic Council before it's too late." The transport shuddered as they broke through the planet's atmosphere. Behind them, Thelshan could see the Devourer ships descending like metallic rain. Each vessel was the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that unmade matter at the quantum level. They consumed everything they touched, converting organic matter into more of themselves in an endless cycle of replication and destruction. 3 days later, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened aboard the massive station orbiting Nexus Prime. Representatives from 47 different species filled the great amphitheater, their various forms creating a rainbow of alien biology. The normally vibrant chamber felt subdued, weighted down by the magnitude of the crisis. Thelshan stood at the speaker's podium, his blue-scaled form trembling with barely contained emotion. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying the natural harmonics that made Kalari speech so beautiful. "My people are dying. As I speak, the Devourers are consuming our homeworld. They have already destroyed 6 of our colony worlds. We estimate that we have perhaps 10 cycles before our entire species is extinct." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. The hegemony representative, a massive insectoid creature named Zixthera, clicked her mandibles in what passed for concern among her people. "The Devourers represent a threat to all organic life," she acknowledged. However, the Kalari chose to build their civilization on principles of pacifism. "You have no military, no weapons of war, no defensive capabilities beyond your art. What aid could we provide that would make a difference?" The question stung because it was true. The Kalari had never developed military technology, believing that violence was antithetical to their nature. Even now, facing extinction, many of his people argued that they should die with dignity rather than compromise their principles. "We have intelligence," Thelshan replied desperately. "Our scouts have observed the Devourer fleet. We know their movement patterns, their consumption rates. We can provide detailed tactical information to any species willing to mount a defense." The Vorthani delegate, Ambassador Kresh, leaned forward on his throne-like chair. His species had one of the most advanced military forces in the galaxy, with ships that could crack planets and soldiers genetically modified for warfare. "The Vorthani Empire has run simulations based on your intelligence reports," he said in his deep, resonant voice. "The Devourers outnumber our combined fleets by approximately 12 to 1. Their technology is at least 3 centuries ahead of our most advanced systems. Any direct military engagement would result in total annihilation of our forces." Other delegates nodded in agreement. The Crystalline Collective had tried to fight the Devourers when they first emerged from the galactic void 2 years ago. Of their 1,000 crystal ships, only 3 had escaped to bring word of the enemy's capabilities. "Then what do you suggest?" Thelshan asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "That we simply accept extinction? That 47 species of the galaxy stand by and watch as the Devourers consume everything in their path? We suggest strategic withdrawal," replied the delegate from the Ethereal Union. Her gaseous form shimmered with frustrated energy. Our mathematicians have calculated optimal evacuation routes. If we begin immediately, we can relocate the core populations of all member species to the Andromeda Galaxy. It would take the Devourers centuries to follow us there, abandoning our homes, our history, our very identity, Thelshan whispered. Is this what the Great Galactic Council has become? A organization dedicated to running away? The chamber erupted in angry clicks, warbles, and hisses from various species. Several delegates stood to voice their objections. But Thelshan wasn't listening anymore. His people were dying while politicians debated evacuation procedures. Somewhere in the galaxy, children were being consumed by mechanical monsters, while their parents sang lullabies to comfort them in their final moments. As the session dissolved into chaos, a new voice cut through the noise. It was unlike any sound the delegates had heard before. Not musical like the Kalari, not resonant like the Vorthani, not harmonically complex like the ethereals. It was harsh, direct, and somehow compelling in its simplicity. "Excuse me," the voice said, and the entire amphitheater fell silent. A figure walked into the chamber through the main entrance, and every delegate turned to stare. The being was bipedal, roughly the same height as a Kalari but broader and more muscular. Its skin was a pale brown color, and it had only 2 eyes positioned on the front of its head in a configuration that suggested a predatory species. It wore a simple dark blue uniform, with no obvious technological enhancements, yet somehow commanded the attention of the entire room. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force," the figure announced, walking steadily toward the speaker's podium. "I represent the United Earth government and our colonial territories. We received Ambassador Thelshan's distress call approximately 4 days ago." Whispers filled the chamber. Most delegates had heard of humans. They were a relatively young species that had recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Earth was located in a remote spiral arm of the galaxy, far from the major trade routes and political centers. They had applied for Galactic Council membership several times but had been deemed too primitive and aggressive for inclusion. "I'm afraid there has been some misunderstanding," said the Council's senior director, an ancient wisdom keeper whose crystalline body pulsed with authority. "Humans are not members of this council. You have no right to participate in these proceedings." Admiral Chen stopped at the base of the podium and looked up at the assembled delegates. Her expression was calm, but something in her eyes made several representatives unconsciously shift back in their seats. "You're right," she said simply. "We're not members of your council. We're not part of your alliances, or your trade federations, or your mutual defense pacts." But Ambassador Thelshan sent out a general distress call asking for help. He didn't limit his request to council members. She paused and looked directly at Thelshan, who felt a strange stirring of hope in his chest despite himself. "The way we see it, someone is murdering entire species, slaughtering families, destroying civilizations, wiping out millions of years of evolution and culture. You can debate evacuation procedures all you want, but we're here to fight." The silence that followed was so complete that the ambient hum of the station's life support systems seemed deafening. "Fight?" Zixthara clicked her mandibles in what might have been amusement. "Honored human, your species has been spacefaring for barely 2 centuries. Your most advanced ships are fusion-powered craft that would barely qualify as system patrol vessels by our standards. What could you possibly hope to accomplish against an enemy that has defeated the combined might of the crystalline collective?" Admiral Chen smiled, and something about that expression made Thelshan's scales shiver. It was not a pleasant smile. "Ma'am, with respect, I think you're misunderstanding something fundamental about humans. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because it's the right thing to do." She gestured toward Thelshan. "This being came to you asking for help. He told you his people are dying. And your response was to debate whether it's cost-effective to save them. Well, humans have a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing." The Admiral reached into her uniform and withdrew a small device. She activated it, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a tactical map of the local galactic region, with red markers indicating Devourer fleet positions and blue markers showing human ship deployments. As of 6 hours ago, the human defense fleet has established defensive positions around the remaining Kalari colonies. We've also sent evacuation ships to help civilian populations reach safety. Our primary battle group is currently en route to engage the Devourer advance fleet. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The display showed that human ships were already moving into position for battles that every council species had deemed hopeless. "This is madness," declared the Vorthani ambassador. "Your entire fleet will be destroyed. You're sending your people to their deaths for no strategic purpose." "Maybe," Admiral Chen acknowledged. "But at least our people will die doing something that matters. At least they'll die fighting to protect innocents instead of running away." She turned to address the full assembly, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "You want to know what humans can contribute to this fight? We can contribute something none of you seem to have. The willingness to stand up to bullies, even when the odds are impossible." The Admiral deactivated her holographic display and looked directly at Thelshan. "Ambassador, my government has authorized me to offer your people full protection under the Human Colonial Defense Charter. If you accept, we'll treat any attack on Kalari civilians as an attack on human civilians. We'll defend your refugees, your culture, and your right to exist as a species." Thelshan felt his heart racing in his chest. Everything about this human female suggested a predator species. The forward-facing eyes, the controlled aggression, the casual way she spoke of warfare. Yet somehow, she offered more hope than all the advanced civilizations of the Council combined. "What do you require in return?" he asked, barely daring to breathe. "Nothing," she replied. "Helping people doesn't require a transaction. It just requires the decision to help." The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates from dozens of species began talking at once. Some voiced outrage at human presumption. Others expressed concern about the strategic implications. Still others demanded to know more about human military capabilities. Through it all, Admiral Chen stood calmly at the base of the podium, waiting for the noise to die down. When it finally did, she spoke again. "We know most of you think we're primitive. You see our simple technology, our crude ships, our lack of sophisticated weapon systems. You're probably right about all of that. But there's something you need to understand about humans." She paused, and her smile returned. This time, it was somehow even more unsettling than before. "We've been at war with something or someone for our entire history. We've fought each other, fought our environment, fought diseases, fought natural disasters, fought scarcity and ignorance and fear. We've never known a time of true peace. And that's made us very, very good at fighting." The Admiral activated her communications device. "Fleet Command, this is Admiral Chen. Please transmit the tactical briefing to all Council representatives." New holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber, each one showing detailed specifications for human military equipment. The numbers were startling. Where other species built elegant, efficient ships with minimal crews, humans built massive, heavily armored vessels bristling with redundant weapon systems. Where other species focused on technological superiority, humans emphasized brutal effectiveness and the ability to absorb enormous casualties while continuing to fight. "These are the ships we're bringing to defend the Kalari," Admiral Chen announced. 12,000 vessels ranging from fighter craft to dreadnought battleships. Each one designed with a single purpose: to destroy anything that threatens human civilians. She gestured to one particular ship schematic. "This is the UES Indomitable, our flagship. She carries enough nuclear warheads to sterilize a planet, enough conventional explosives to crack a moon, and enough Marines to invade a solar system. More importantly, she's crewed by people who volunteer to die for strangers." The silence in the chamber was now absolute. Even the most militaristic species represented in the Council had never seen weapons specifications like these. The humans hadn't just built a military force. They had built an engine of destruction. "You still don't understand," said Zixthara, though her voice now carried a note of uncertainty. "The Devourers aren't just advanced, they're utterly alien. They don't think like organic life. They don't feel pain or fear or doubt. They simply consume everything in their path. No amount of courage or determination can overcome that kind of enemy." Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. They don't feel pain or fear or doubt. But that also means they don't understand something that every human child learns on the playground. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate who was capable of making eye contact. Sometimes, the crazy kid who refuses to stay down wins the fight. The first battle began 3 days after Admiral Chen's address to the Galactic Council. Captain Marcus Rivera stood on the bridge of the destroyer UES Defiant, watching as his tactical display filled with red contact markers. The Devourer advance fleet had arrived at the Kalari colony world of Velthar exactly as predicted. Their massive ships emerging from hyperspace like metallic cancers against the stars. Contact count is now at 47 enemy vessels, reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the sensor station. Largest one is approximately 12 kilometers long. They're already beginning planetary bombardment operations. Rivera nodded grimly. Through the viewports, he could see the first waves of Devourer attack craft, descending toward Velthar's surface like angry hornets. Each wave carried enough firepower to level a major city. The planet's 2 million Kalari inhabitants were helpless against such an assault. "Signal the fleet," Rivera commanded. "All ships, execute attack pattern Delta. Remember, our job is to buy time for the evacuation transports, not to win a glorious victory." The human battle group numbered only 36 ships against the Devourer's 47. But every human vessel immediately turned toward the enemy fleet, without hesitation. To an outside observer, it looked like suicide. The Devourers had larger ships, more advanced weapons, and shields that could absorb the energy output of a small star. What the Devourers didn't have was experience fighting humans. The UES Defiant led the charge, her captain having volunteered for the most dangerous position in the formation. As the destroyer closed range with the nearest Devourer vessel, automated targeting systems locked onto her hull and began firing streams of coherent energy that could melt through battleship armor in seconds. Instead of trying to evade the incoming fire, Rivera did something that violated every principle of space combat doctrine ever written. He ordered his ship to accelerate directly into the enemy weapons barrage. "Sir," called out his tactical officer, "we're taking massive hull damage. Forward shields are down to 30%. "Good," Rivera replied calmly. "That means we're close enough." The Defiant's main batteries opened fire at point-blank range, her nuclear-tipped torpedoes slamming into the Devourer ship's hull with devastating effect. The alien vessel's shields, designed to deflect long-range energy weapons, were completely ineffective against kinetic projectiles delivered from less than a kilometer away. Explosions blossomed across the Devourer ship's surface as human weapons found their mark. But instead of pulling back to a safe distance, Rivera ordered his gunners to continue firing even as enemy return fire began tearing his ship apart. "Hull breach on decks 7 through 10, reported the damage control officer. "We've lost main power to the port weapons array. Switch to auxiliary power," Rivera ordered. "Keep firing until we can't fire anymore." Across the battlefield, 35 other human ships were executing variations of the same insane strategy. They ignored tactical doctrine, disregarded their own safety, and focused entirely on inflicting maximum damage on the enemy before they died. It was warfare reduced to its most primal element: the willingness to sacrifice everything for a greater purpose. The Devourers, for all their advanced technology, had never encountered anything like it. Their combat algorithms were designed to fight rational opponents who valued their own survival. They had no programming to deal with enemies who treated their own destruction as an acceptable cost of battle. Within the first hour, 12 human ships had been destroyed or disabled. But they had taken 18 Devourer vessels with them, and the alien fleet's advance toward Velthar had been completely halted. Admiral Chen watched the battle from the command bridge of the UES Indomitable, positioned 50 million kilometers away with the main fleet. Her tactical displays showed the brutal mathematics of the engagement. Humans dying at a rate that would horrify any sane military commander, yet somehow managing to inflict proportionally greater losses on a technologically superior enemy. "Admiral," reported her communications officer, "we're receiving surrender requests from several Kalari civilian ships. They're asking permission to join the evacuation convoy." Chen nodded. "Grant permission to all civilian vessels." Make sure they understand our ships will protect them, regardless of their species or political affiliation." As she spoke, another red marker disappeared from her display. The destroyer, UES Valiant, had just sacrificed herself to take out a Devourer command ship, ramming her nuclear reactor core into the alien vessel's hull when her weapons failed. Captain Lisa Park and her crew of 200 had died instantly, but their sacrifice had eliminated a ship that could have coordinated attacks against the evacuation transports. "Ma'am," called her tactical officer. "The advance fleet is reporting successful defensive operations. They've bought us the time we needed. All civilian evacuations from Velthar are complete. Signal Captain Rivera," Chen ordered. "Tell him to fall back to Rally Point Bravo. They've done their job." But the communication never reached Rivera. The UES Defiant had been destroyed 20 minutes earlier, her captain staying at his post to coordinate final torpedo salvos, even as his bridge filled with toxic smoke. His last transmission had been a simple message: "Tell Admiral Chen we held the line." The second phase of the operation began 6 hours later, as the main human fleet moved to engage the primary Devourer force. This time, the aliens were ready for human tactics. They had modified their formations to account for ramming attacks, adjusted their targeting priorities to focus on human command ships, and deployed new weapons specifically designed to counter the humans' aggressive close-range fighting style. None of it mattered. Colonel Diana Walsh led the first wave of assault shuttles against the Devourer flagship, a massive vessel the size of a small city. Her pilots flew through defensive fire that should have been impossible to penetrate, weaving between energy beams and missile salvos, with a combination of skill and sheer audacity that defied rational explanation. "Remember," Walsh transmitted to her squadron as they approached the enemy ship's hull, "we're not trying to destroy this thing from the outside. We're going inside to plant charges in their reactor core." The assault shuttles crashed through the Devourer ship's hull like bullets through paper, their reinforced nose sections designed specifically for this kind of brutal boarding action. Inside the alien vessel, human Marines found themselves fighting in a nightmare landscape of mechanical horrors and self-repairing corridors that tried to consume them. But humans had been fighting nightmares for millennia. Where other species might have retreated in terror, the Marines simply adapted their tactics and kept pushing forward. They used the alien ship's own technology against itself, turning maintenance drones into improvised weapons and reprogramming security systems to target Devourer defenders instead of human invaders. Lieutenant James Cooper led his squad through a corridor lined with mechanical tendrils that lashed out at anything that moved. Instead of finding an alternate route, he ordered his men to cut through the tendrils with plasma torches while using their bodies as shields for the squad's demolition specialist. "Jenkins, how much longer do you need?" Cooper shouted over the sound of gunfire and mechanical screeching. "2 more minutes, sir," replied Sergeant Anna Jenkins, working frantically to plant nuclear charges next to what appeared to be a power distribution node. "These things keep trying to grow back." 1. Cooper nodded and turned to his remaining soldiers. "You heard her. We hold this position for 2 minutes. Anyone who wants to live through this, shoot anything that moves." The squad formed a defensive circle around Jenkins, firing in all directions as the Devourer ship's immune system mobilized against them. Mechanical creatures poured from ventilation shafts, walls began secreting acid designed to dissolve organic matter, and the corridor itself started to contract in an attempt to crush the invaders. The humans fought with weapons that were primitive by galactic standards: chemical projectile firearms, explosive grenades, and energy weapons powered by simple fusion cells. But they fought with a ferocity that shocked even their enemies. When their weapons failed, they used improvised clubs and knives. When those broke, they used their fists and teeth. "Charges are set," Jenkins announced, just as a mechanical tentacle wrapped around her leg and began dragging her toward a grinding disposal mechanism. 30 seconds to detonation. Cooper didn't hesitate. He emptied his entire ammunition supply into the tentacle holding Jenkins, then grabbed her arm and hauled her back to the squad's position. Around them, the alien ship was beginning to react to the presence of nuclear explosives in its vital systems. "Move, move, move!" Cooper yelled, and his squad ran for their extraction point as the corridor began collapsing behind them. They didn't all make it. Private Rodriguez was caught by a security drone and torn apart by rotating blades. Corporal Thompson stayed behind to hold a bulkhead door open for his squadmates and was crushed when the ship's automated systems sealed the breach. But Jenkins and Cooper and 3 other Marines reached their shuttle just as the nuclear charges detonated deep inside the Devourer vessel. The explosion tore through the alien ship's power grid like a chain reaction, causing cascade failures throughout its massive structure. Secondary explosions bloomed across the hull as backup systems overloaded, and ammunition stores were consumed by runaway energy discharges. But even as their flagship died around them, the Devourers continued fighting. Their smaller vessels pressed their attack against human ships with mechanical persistence, trading losses at rates that would have broken any organic military force. Admiral Chen watched the tactical display from her command chair, noting that her fleet had been reduced to less than half strength. They had destroyed or disabled most of the Devourer force, but at a cost that would have been considered catastrophic by any conventional measure. "Admiral," reported her intelligence officer, "we're detecting massive hyperspace distortions at the edge of the system. Looks like Devourer reinforcements." Chen nodded. The enemy's main fleet was arriving ahead of schedule, drawn by distress signals from the advance force. Within hours, her battered ships would face an enemy force 10 times their size, with no hope of reinforcement or retreat. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Prepare for the next phase of operations." "Ma'am," her communications officer said hesitantly, "perhaps we should consider strategic withdrawal. We've successfully evacuated the civilian population. There's no military objective that justifies engaging the main Devourer fleet." Chen turned to look at the young officer, and her expression was gentle but absolutely firm. "Lieutenant, what's the first principle of human military doctrine?" "Ma'am, we never abandon our allies. Ever. Not when they need us. Not when the odds are impossible. Not when common sense says we should run away." She gestured toward the tactical display, showing the incoming enemy fleet. "Those Devourers aren't just threatening Velthar anymore. They're threatening the entire Kalari species, and as long as there's a single human ship capable of fighting, we'll stand between them and innocent civilians." The lieutenant nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "Should I signal the fleet to prepare for engagement?" "No," Chen replied with a smile that would have looked perfectly at home on a wolf. "Signal the fleet to prepare for war. Throughout human space, emergency broadcasts were already mobilizing every available ship for immediate deployment to the Velthar system. Civilian freighters were being converted into missile platforms, mining ships were being equipped with nuclear rams, and passenger liners were being loaded with Marines and assault shuttles. The call had gone out across every human colony and station. Innocents were dying, and humanity was going to war. By the time the main Devourer fleet arrived in the Velthar system, they found something that violated every principle of galactic warfare. Instead of the broken remnants of a defeated human force, they encountered the largest military fleet in human history. Ships from every branch of the Colonial Defense Force, volunteers from the Merchant Marine, converted civilian vessels bristling with improvised weapons, and prototype warships that existed only because human engineers had worked around the clock to build them. Nearly 50,000 ships hung in space around Velthar, representing every military resource humanity could bring to bear. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting an enemy with technology centuries ahead of their own. They attacked anyway. The battle that followed would be remembered as the bloodiest engagement in galactic history. For 72 hours, human and Devourer forces clashed in a conflict that lit up the night sky of every planet in the system. Ships died by the hundreds, brave crews sacrificing themselves to take out even a single enemy vessel. Space itself became a graveyard of twisted metal and cooling plasma. But for every human ship that died, 2 Devourers were destroyed. For every Marine who fell in boarding actions, 3 alien vessels were crippled by internal explosions. The Devourers had superior technology, but humans had something more powerful: the absolute refusal to give up. When Admiral Chen's flagship was finally destroyed, command passed to Captain Martinez aboard the UES Retribution. When Martinez died, leading a ramming attack against a Devourer super dreadnought, command passed to Commander Thompson. The chain of command extended through dozens of officers, each one prepared to die rather than abandon the mission. As the battle entered its final phase, the last human ships formed a defensive wall around the evacuation transports carrying Kalari refugees. They were running out of ammunition. Their hulls were breached in dozens of places, and their crews were exhausted beyond the limits of human endurance. But they held the line. In the end, the Devourers retreated. Not because they had been defeated. They still outnumbered the surviving human ships by a significant margin. They retreated because they had never encountered an enemy that fought like humans, and their programming could not calculate how to defeat an opponent who treated victory and death as equally acceptable outcomes. The evacuation was successful. Every Kalari civilian who could be saved was loaded onto human transports and carried to safety. The price had been enormous. More than 30,000 human ships destroyed, over 2 million human personnel killed or missing. But the mission was accomplished. As the last refugee transport cleared the system, Commander Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of the damaged cruiser UES Defiance, one of fewer than 300 human ships still capable of spaceflight. Around her, the crew worked to repair battle damage and tend to wounded comrades. "Ma'am," reported her communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They want to discuss our actions in this system." Mitchell smiled tiredly. "Tell them we'll be happy to discuss anything they want. But first, we need to make sure our Kalari friends are safely settled in their new homes." Through the viewport, she could see the refugee convoy disappearing into hyperspace, carrying the survivors of an entire species to a new life among the stars. It had cost humanity dearly, but it had been worth every sacrifice. After all, that's what humans did. They fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves, protected those who needed protection, and never counted the cost when innocent lives were at stake. The Devourers had learned something new about the galaxy that day. There was a species that would go to war for strangers, die for principles, and never surrender as long as there was something worth fighting for. They had learned about humanity, and they had learned to fear it. 6 months after the Battle of Velthar, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from dozens of species gathered for an emergency session. But this time, the humans weren't uninvited guests pleading for recognition. They sat at the center of the chamber, surrounded by empty chairs that had once belonged to delegates now hiding in the furthest reaches of known space. Ambassador Thelshan stood at the speaker's podium, his blue scales shimmering with a confidence that hadn't been there before the humans arrived. Behind him, a holographic display showed current military positions throughout the galaxy. Red markers indicated Devourer fleets, but for the first time in 2 years, they weren't advancing. "Honored delegates," Thelshan began, his voice carrying the harmonics of hope rather than desperation. "The situation has stabilized. The Devourer expansion has not only been halted but reversed. They have abandoned 12 star systems in the past month alone." Murmurs of amazement rippled through the chamber. The insectoid delegate from the hegemony, Zix Thara, clicked her mandibles in disbelief. "How is this possible? Our intelligence reports indicated that the Devourers had received massive reinforcements from their staging areas beyond the galactic rim." General Patricia Hayes, the new human military representative, stood to address the assembly. Where Admiral Chen had been diplomatic and measured, Hayes was blunt and direct. She had earned her position by leading the successful defense of 3 human colony worlds against Devourer attacks, losing an arm and half her face in the process. The mechanical replacements only made her more intimidating. "They did receive reinforcements," Hayes confirmed, her scarred face showing no emotion. "Approximately 15,000 ships, including several vessel classes we'd never encountered before. They deployed them in a coordinated assault against our defensive positions in the Terran corridor." She activated a new section of the holographic display, showing the aftermath of what appeared to be a massive space battle. Debris fields stretched for light years, the twisted remains of both human and Devourer vessels drifting in the void like metallic graveyards. "The battle lasted 18 days, Hayes continued. "We lost 4,000 ships and nearly 500,000 personnel. But we destroyed their entire reinforcement fleet." Silence fell over the chamber. The numbers she was describing represented losses on a scale that would have broken most military forces. Yet the human general spoke of them with the casual tone of someone discussing weather patterns. "How?" asked the representative from the Ethereal Union, her gaseous form shimmering with confusion. "How did you achieve such results against a technologically superior enemy?" Hayes smiled, and several delegates unconsciously leaned back in their seats. There was something predatory about that expression. Something that reminded them why humans had evolved as apex predators on a world filled with dangerous creatures. "We learned," she said simply. "Every battle teaches us something new about how they fight, how they think, how they react to different tactical approaches. More importantly, we learned how to make them afraid." She gestured to the display, highlighting specific areas of the debris field. "The Devourers are machines, but they're not mindless. They have some form of collective consciousness that allows them to coordinate their actions across vast distances. That consciousness is capable of learning and adaptation, but it's also capable of something else." Hayes paused for dramatic effect. "Terror." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Terror was not something most galactic species associated with artificial intelligences. Machines might calculate odds and adjust strategies, but the concept of fear seemed fundamentally biological. The turning point came when we started using what our military theorists call existential warfare, Hayes explained. Instead of trying to destroy their ships, we started targeting their ability to reproduce and repair themselves. We identified the mobile factories they used to convert organic matter into new Devourer units, and we made destroying those factories our primary objective. Sanely, new images appeared on the display, showing human ships engaged in what could only be described as suicide attacks against massive Devourer manufacturing vessels. The humans weren't trying to win through superior firepower. They were trying to make the enemy's very existence unsustainable. Every factory we destroyed represented thousands of Devourers that would never be built, Hayes continued. But more importantly, it represented a permanent loss. Unlike us, they can't simply build new factories easily. Each one requires specific materials and configurations that take them months to assemble. The Vorthani representative, Ambassador Kresh, leaned forward in his throne-like chair. His species had been studying human military tactics since the Battle of Velthar, trying to understand how such a primitive force could achieve such impossible victories. "General Hayes," he rumbled in his deep voice, "our analysts have studied your combat reports. Your casualty rates are beyond catastrophic. By any reasonable military standard, how do you maintain unit cohesion when your forces suffer such losses?" Hayes turned to face him directly, her mechanical eye focusing with an audible whir. "Ambassador, I think you're asking the wrong question. You want to know how we maintain morale when we're dying in massive numbers. But that assumes we're fighting to survive.